I'm with the Washington State Arts Commission and have been with the commission for just about 3 years now, actually. I was brought on board to the Arts Commission to develop and run the Creative Districts program. I have a background in marketing, design, communications, and economic development. So before I came to the Arts Commission, I worked at the Thurston Economic Development Council for about 6.5 years, doing economic development projects across all over the country, that we worked with other organizations, but primarily focusing on Thurston County and cities like Olympia, Lacey, Yelm, Tumwater. That's a little bit about me. And I want you to think about the fact that arts intersects and affects all aspects of our community. So it intersects environmental, social, and economic aspects. All of these three pieces are kind of the three-legged stool of community and economic development. And in order for a community to be healthy, these three things need to be in balance with each other or work together in a way that is kind of symbiotic. And arts influences all of those things and is impacted by all of those things, And the fact of the matter is, even during a pandemic, we all sort of live and breathe arts and culture every single day. Even if we're not realizing it, even if we're like, well, I've been stuck in my house for 6 months. Yeah, but you probably, watch TV or listen to music or, read magazines, all of those kinds of things have to do with arts. So this is my data nerd slide, and this talks all about the Washington State creative economy. And so we have numbers for 2018. Those are the most recent numbers that we have. And in Washington at the time, in 2018, there were over 305,000 jobs in what we consider to be creative economy jobs, right? And those are everything from software developers, post-secondary teachers, photographers, authors, writers, musicians, computer programmers, graphic designers, web developers, marketing, right? And that doesn't even include all of what we consider to be traditional arts and culture, such as theater, visual arts, some of those other kinds of things. What's been really amazing is that the creative economy makes up a huge percentage of Washington's economy, 7.8%. So just to kind of give you a little bit of understanding of what that looks like, agriculture in Washington is 13% of the economy, right? And so creative economy is huge, and it employs more people than agriculture and forest products and life sciences combined. Now, I think, one of the major sectors that's been impacted more than any other, besides possibly, service or hospitality, is obviously arts and culture, because they're very dependent on bringing people together, and that's something that we know, obviously, as the statewide arts agency, and we're working very diligently to ensure that we will still continue to have arts and culture and creativity in our communities, even after COVID. So I want to talk a little bit about what a creative district is. It's a geographically defined area, and it's not defined by us as the Arts Commission. It's defined by the folks in the community, like in the steering committee and everything, that decide where they want this sort of concentration of stuff to happen. We look at it primarily as a vehicle for growing jobs and economic opportunities, for growing small businesses. A lot of artists are self-employed and they're still business owners, and we want to make sure that they have opportunities to grow their business as they see fit, as it works for them. If they want to grow and expand their business and hire other people, that they can do that. And even if they aren't, even if you have a person who might be a part-time artist, right? They have a regular day job and they do art on the side, as it were, that eventually they could translate into having that be their full-time career. That's something that we definitely would like to see. Creative districts are sort of focal points. They're places for people to gather to enjoy arts and culture, not just arts and culture, but also other kinds of activities that sort of surround arts and culture as well. So things like, restaurants and buskers and just walking down the street, seeing public art and murals and those kinds of things. And we look at this whole process as a way for a community to promote itself and its unique identity. So this is a really quick question, who or what is creative? So it's artists, it's entertainers, it's restaurateurs, inventors, museums, historical and cultural assets, historical museums, food manufacturers as part of the creative economy, like specialty food, right? So like for an example, in Olympia, they have a company called Oli Kraut, and they make sort of fermented foods. And It's pretty interesting, you know, artisans, app developers, architects. So our program is a planning and application process. It's a state certification, right? So when you go through the process, what you're looking to do is get certified by the state of Washington. So it's kind of in effect us giving a stamp of approval, if you will, of the arts and culture activities that A, exist now, but B, could possibly exist in the future. It's customized for each community. And when I say that, that means that each community's process for becoming certified, their planning process is unique to them, and their creative district is unique to them. That said, we have a uniform set of criteria that we kind of apply across the board, but it is scalable because we recognize that a creative district in Olympia, for example, is not going to look the same as a creative district in TWISP. It's obviously TWISP has 900 and some odd people, and Olympia has over 50,000. So, you know, but the process is scalable and it works, and it's worked in both of those communities because both of them are creative districts. So we want to make sure that throughout this process, communities foster authentic and diverse engagement amongst their communities. You know, the more the merrier is what we say, making sure that people who aren't always brought into these kinds of processes are brought into them, and brought into them early if possible, you know. And we call them not the usual suspects. And so that's something that we look to see that communities are really doing that, because we want to make sure that the creative district is representative of the whole community. And additionally, in our legislation was written a piece that talked about affordable housing options for artists and creatives, and not just affordable housing, but also things like maker spaces or live work spaces, studio spaces, because, you know, I mean, housing is a big issue in Washington State. It's really expensive to live here, and we want to make sure that the communities that, you know, are cool, and the people who make those communities cool can stay in those communities and they don't get priced out. So that's something that we're working on. You know, we're working in partnership with ArtSpace, which is a national organization. I'll talk a little bit about that more, but just making sure that communities are thinking that if housing is an issue or studio space is an issue or those kinds of things are an issue, how can you think about using your creative district designation as a leverage tool to make some of those things happen within your community. So there are a number of benefits that creative district designation brings. Obviously, it's a state certification, and so one of the great things is because of that, it is an avenue for partnerships and grants, especially if you're looking at big grants from national foundations or national philanthropic organizations. Very often, they like to see a process, you know, who's involved, how did you guys do it, what are your plans, what are you going to do, all of that kind of stuff when you have to write these grants. And a lot of the work that a community does in the creative district planning process can be translated, even sometimes almost directly, into some of these grants, right? We have opportunities right now for some grant, you know, for grants that are available through funding that we've gotten through the legislature, which I'll talk a little bit about in a couple more slides, you know, to make sure that communities can be successful. So like I mentioned, we look at this as an economic development tool. You know, we consider ourselves the economic development agency for arts and culture. You know, the Department of Commerce does our, economic development for a lot of other sectors, but for us, arts and culture is key. You know, we want to make sure that communities have the opportunity to grow, entrepreneurs, to give people, small businesses, an opportunity to grow. You know, and that communities can use the certification as a way to promote and organize arts sector activities. So a lot of times, you know, when we get together with folks, we'll hear these things like, well, this community group is doing this thing over here, and these guys are doing this over here, and way over there, somebody else is doing something else, but they don't always necessarily know what the other is doing. And this is an opportunity for them to do that because they're strength in numbers, right? They can help support each other. They can help create a more cohesive arts and culture ecosystem within their community. You know, and for me, you know, for my community development background, bringing community members together so that they can create their future is key to having a healthy and successful community for the long term, right? You know, we encourage folks to think about what are the things that you want to see right now, right? What are things that you want to see in 5 years from now? What do you want to see your community be in 20 years from now? Some of you guys on this call have lived in Burien for a really long time, and others have been there for just a couple of years, right? So one of the things to think about is what are the things about Burien that are important to the person who's lived here for 3 years and the person who's lived here for 30 years, right? I bet if you had that conversation, there'd be a lot more commonalities than differences. So this is an opportunity for folks to be able to have those kinds of conversations and think about those commonalities. So our process is relatively straightforward. It's not to say that it's necessarily super easy, but it's not difficult. It does take time. And so I'm going to talk about each one of these 4 steps. So step number 1 is gather, number 2 is plan, step 3 is apply, and step 4 is begin. The URL that's at the bottom of this slide is to our Community Readiness Toolkit, which is a free resource for communities to use, basically a workbook. Individuals can use them collectively or individually to answer some questions. So we'll talk about that also in a second. So the first step is gathering your planning team. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So the group has been working on stuff for a while in a small group environment, which is great. But now it's about bringing in the larger community, right? And letting more people participate in the process, to help really do some of that visioning and to make the decision if this creative district idea is something that you actually want to pursue collectively. And if so, and that's the case, and I believe that's probably the case for Burien, then you guys will kind of move on to step 2, which is the planning part. And so when you think about, planning the district, you think about who are the partners, who's going to be involved. So that can look like anything from arts and culture organizations to your local downtown association or your VCB, so your Visitor and Convention Bureau, your economic development folks, the city, school districts, colleges or community colleges, if there are any around, citizens at large, social service organizations. So if you have organizations that support youth or senior citizens, all of those kinds of things should be brought into the fold, right? Because they all are make up the fabric of the community and should be able to contribute or have the opportunity at any rate to contribute to the formation of the creative district. When you're in your planning session, this is also where you'll think about where the district is going to be. What's it going to look like? What's the special sauce? What is the thing that would make your creative district unique and different than other people's in other communities, right? And then, thinking about how is the group or the organization who eventually becomes the administrator of the district going to promote and encourage the creative economy. So we ask for folks to think about short-term, easily achievable goals, as well as longer-term goals that could have longer impact on the community. So once you get through the planning process, which depending on the community could take, we've seen some communities get through the entire process from start to finish in about 6 months, which is extremely fast. And then some of the other districts that we've worked with, have been working on it for 1.5 years or more. It just depends on sort of the participation of folks, if people in the community are really committed to the process, if people can sort of learn to, get along well and are able to synergize well, that tends to make the process go a little bit more quickly. Once the planning process is done, you can apply for the certification. We have an online submission form that you can look at right now. We also have guidelines. So the program guidelines and the submission guidelines are on there as well. And in the guidelines, it basically lays out all of the questions that are going to be answered. There's a couple of steps in the application process that a community needs to take, but it's relatively straightforward, and then once the application comes into us, then we will go through and take a look at we convene a panel of folks from across the state. So I have a pool of people that I work with. Some of them are in economic development, some of them are arts and culture leaders, some are staff members of the Arts Commission, others are on our Board of Commissioners. So we bring them together, they take a look at the individual application, and the idea is that all of the stuff, the hard stuff, and all of the red flags, if you will, have been answered, so that my goal is to make sure that if a community submits their application, they will get certified. So there's a lot of work on the back end that needs to happen in order to make that happen. And my role is to walk communities through the whole process. So once a community is certified, then they can begin their, their work. Right now, we do offer a small startup grant for the creative districts that is, of course, pending, or it's depending on funding. So hopefully that will continue. But I mean, if we've fallen off a fiscal cliff, that might not be the case. So, but we're certainly working and making sure that we can provide funding sources, at least in the beginning, for the creative districts. And the certification lasts for 5 years. During which time the creative districts will sort of, begin to implement the project, their goals and their things that they were saying that they wanted to do in their strategic plan, and then work on tracking progress. And we have a number of tools and support services that we provide to communities to make sure that they're successful. So we provide resources and guidance. We have what we consider to be a fair application process. It's transparent and it's equal across the board. Each community is judged on the merits of their own application. They're not in competition with other organizations or with other communities at this point. That's not something that we think is equitable, and it doesn't necessarily foster, conviviality among the creative districts. So for now, the community is they're not being pitted against another one, or not being, if two communities submit applications at the same time, if they're both worthy of creative district designation, then they'll both be certified. So we also have a lot of networking opportunities. We try to convene our creative districts regularly. And by that, I mean, we've done them in person. The one that we did this year was not in person. We had an online, it was like 3 or 4 hour long meeting where we got all the creative districts together and, talked shop and told them about the changes of the program and some of the new things we were doing, wanted to get some of their feedback. So we knew how we could improve our program as time goes on, because we want to make sure that it's relevant for folks. We do have, like I said, some grants and ongoing funding opportunities that are available. And again, working to help folks and communities think about affordable housing, live workspaces, that sort of thing. We provide ongoing technical assistance. I do. I mean, I'm the program manager, and I'm the only person on the Arts Commission staff that works with the Creative District program. And so, I can't do everything. So we work sometimes with consultants who can help us with things. Oftentimes we have community members who might be really good at, say, grant writing, for example. And so we might host a technical assistance, like a webinar, where they explain how to become a better, more successful grant writer, for example. We've gotten a lot of feedback from the districts that are already certified about some of the things that they're going to need, which is slightly different than the needs of the districts like Burien, for example, that are still in their planning process. And my intention is to be able to support communities throughout the whole thing. So in the planning process, and then afterwards as well, once they're into certification and starting to help them implement some of their ideas. So when you think about what makes a successful district, these are some things that there's more things than this, but these are the very basic and broad sort of categories that help to make a successful district. Is that there's a clearly defined arts and culture identity, and that the folks who are involved in it can get on board with it, right? I mean, that's not to say that once you decide what that identity is, that stays that way forever. Obviously, these things will flex and they'll change, and that's what we want to see. But that you understand what that is and how that works, right? Broad community support is key. That's something that we like to see, and that's actually a part of the application process. Is communities need to demonstrate that they have created, a broad sort of outreach to different types of community groups, and if they know of community groups that they haven't really done a good job engaging, that they're going to continue to do that as time goes on. We like to see organizational partnerships that are really strong. So there aren't any sort of requirements as far as who those partnerships are going to be, other than we do have some requirements around who the administrative entity is. So the administrative entity, really quickly, is the organization that agrees to sort of take on the activities of the creative district. They're the ones who will be filing the annual reports with us. They are also the organization that we will be contracting with in the original sort of grant funding round. And the districts or the types of organizations that can do that are either municipal or tribal governments, or a 501c3 or C6. And we have some requirements around, annual budgets and that sort of thing, because we don't want to see a nonprofit organization that has never managed money take, state state grant. So we want to make sure that the organization is actually able to carry out the activities of the district. The city doesn't have to be the administrator. So if it's a different organization, that's totally fine. But the city does need to either approve of it or think that it's fine, whatever that looks like. For some cities, it's a resolution. For others, it's, just a proclamation, for example. Whatever that looks like in your city is kind of what we're looking for, and proof of that, right? So the city council needs to take action on some level, some kind. And we also want to make sure that the community has a solid plan and a long-term vision for activities and growth. So that starts in the very beginning when you're thinking about who are we? What is our community all about? What are the values of this community, right? So when you go back and you have those points when you run up against sticking points or blocks of some kind, which is inevitable in any kind of process, right? That you're able to go back to sort of this plan and say, these are the things that we're supposed to be focusing on. These are the values that we're basing those activities on. And so that way it makes it a little bit easier to move forward. Okay, so, strategies for success. This is just in the early stages. This isn't necessarily success strategies for a creative district that's 3 years into their certification. This is for success in planning, right? So making sure that you're bringing stakeholders together, which is happening right now, finding partners that can participate in the process, like I mentioned a number of them before, making sure that you can define those community values. Obviously values are very personal, but when you think about what is it that our community stands for, or, when you think about why do any of you live in Burien, I'm sure, what I've seen across the board in communities that I've worked with is there's going to be a lot of, answers on the list, but there's going to be a number of them that multiple people say, right? And so those are going to be the ones that will be the base for all of those things, right? And then you want to discover your community assets. So just doing a simple asset map. We have an asset map template in the Creative District toolkit that you can use. And then figuring out what the community goals are and what the community needs, right? Some of those needs are short term and some of them are longer term. And it's a good idea to kind of focus on both at the same time if possible, or focusing on making small wins now that can help you get to those larger wins and those larger needs in the future.
So one thing we're doing is we're putting together a mailing list, and we'll probably be putting together sort of an informational bulletin sort of a thing that will be going out to people periodically. I don't know how much of a formal regular schedule that would be, but we have been gathering email addresses from people, and that, as you know, since you registered, that was on the form. There is a Burien Creative District Facebook page, and also there's some information on the website, which is buriencreativedistrict.com. And like I said, you can always send an email to info@buriencreativedistrict.com. And thank you, Annette, for doing such a great job of explaining all this.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. It's great to see such a wide, varied group. And the fact that you guys have just citizens at large that are participating at this is really awesome. So yeah, that's really, really cool to see. So whatever you're doing, keep it going because it's awesome.